I have thoughts and values and things like that, but it doesn't come together as a package. I'm not a capitalist or socialist or Christian or Hindu. Christian apologetics. That's how I lost my faith. I started off reinforcing my faith and got the wrong result. I would just presume that there was a Jesus, like I presume that Karl Marx isn't made up. I'm not sure I'm convinced reading the Gospels that this really happened. None of this is why I don't really believe anymore. It's partly that it's partly just it didn't add up to overall convincing. And I want to make my mind up to be, if I ever have a discussion like this, not the guy who's trying to win the argument.
Hey, I just had a pretty lengthy conversation with an older gentleman who proved to be quite knowledgeable about matters of the Bible and faith, and is obviously that he has given it quite some thought over his life, and but very pleasant to speak to. Ultimately, I think an atheist, maybe bordering on agnosticism. But we're speaking very in an educated way about matters of religion and faith. So we had a good discussion that developed into a number of different areas, and I shared obviously what my thoughts are in the gospel message, which he seemed to have been familiar with, but in this case I think just faith was lacking. And so my prayer goes out to this gentleman that he would continuously ponder what he knows, what he's heard from me, maybe what I've reminded him, and that God would capture his heart, that he would see in Jesus not just a historical person, but a Lord and a Savior. Anyway, thank you for watching, and hopefully to see you soon in the next video. God bless. Amen.
Do you have any faith? Do you have any belief?
Not a religious faith, no.
So you qualified not a religious faith, but you have like a philosophy or of life?
Obviously, I have thoughts and values and things like that, but it doesn't come together as a package. I'm not a capitalist or socialist or Christian or Hindu. So.
Got it. Has that ever changed for you in your life? Was there a time where you were?
Yeah, I was raised in the Church of England.
Church of England, okay. And if I may ask, what sort of brought you to the current position? Did you consider that belief and dismissed it for a number of reasons? How did that work?
Christian apologetics. That's how I lost my faith.
All right, that's interesting. Yes. So you have been engaged in Christian apologetics, or you have?
Yeah, I'm in my 60s. This is when I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
I started reading about faith and suddenly thought, whoa, wait a minute. So I had a very simple when I was 18.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you said apologetics. So you have asked someone, and then they couldn't have the answer. So, did you read books on apologetics?
Like Scripture Union, that sort of thing, you know.
Yeah. They were just not convincing.
It was a mistake.
It was a mistake. They were just not convincing, or I'm trying to understand.
They went through the arguments against Christianity.
Okay.
Which I'd never thought of.
Right.
And then they gave the answer, which thought isn't quite convincing enough.
I see. If you were to, I don't know how much you remember of that now, but like if you were to sort of say, what are your like top one or two kind of reasons that really don't convince you of belief?
Everywhere. I had no idea where the Bible came from. I hadn't thought about that. So it's Church of England's Protestant, and I hadn't realised that, of course, it's from Catholic, well, pre-Catholic, pre-Orthodox. Mm-hmm. All sorts of things like this. I thought, whoa, wait a minute, this is not simple. I'd never thought it through, and
Yeah. So is your position that like there's no good answer to where the Bible came from, or trying to understand that?
It's kind of like when you hear a politician who's got all the right facts, but you think, you know what I mean? It just you can never say this argument proves Christianity, right, or disproves it, but you just suddenly think, no, this isn't very convincing.
Right.
You know what I mean? You just.
What would be like? What is the threshold? I'm trying to understand. What is the threshold above which you think we should have sufficient evidence that would convince you?
It wasn't anything like that. I started off reinforcing my faith and got the wrong result. But there wasn't anything that I could give you a mathematical formula.
Got it.
And also, it wasn't all intellectual anyway. This was only one bit of it.
Yes. 'Cause that's interesting.
Because the reason I'm so inquisitive about it is that I had a similar journey, but like for me it was I came to a position of being convinced.
Yeah.
My background being I was born in a Catholic family, but not really understanding what my faith is all about until in my later adult years I started looking into it, and then same thing, apologetics and looking deeper into asking the questions about can we trust it, what evidence is there. But for me, it was much more convincing, actually, to the point that I actually became a convinced, believer in faith. Yeah, so it's quite interesting. But for you, it was the opposite, obviously. But would you say there is God at all, or how would you like it apart from the specific faith position?
No, I don't. Well, certainly not as presented. Not the God of Abraham and Jesus. Anyway, is there any other meaning? I'm just cynical about it rather than I know it's not true. I don't buy it.
Okay, so, but would you say there isn't? Like, would you call yourself an atheist?
If someone said to me, what's your opinion? I'd say there isn't a God.
All right, that's interesting. But I guess would you have strong arguments to convince someone else that there isn't God, or you just just your person? Is it more through lack of conviction than being like a staunch advocate for?
I'm not out to convince anyone because. In any case, there's so many different ways you can believe. Some people, when you examine what they believe, it's they're conceptualizing a greater purpose as a being. Do you know what I mean? Which is not what, say, an evangelical or a traditional Catholic would.
Yeah.
So you've got this huge realm of probably two people in the congregation have a different idea sitting next to each other on little points. But so, no, I don't, because it's kind of like if I was trying to convince somebody who believed that, like I mentioned, like socialism and capitalism also, you can't absolutely say, now I've just disproved your position.
Right,
you can't ever.
Right.
No.
Yeah. For me, I mean, what makes all the difference is like I'm coming from more of a kind of science background, because that's what I studied, and looking at the creation, and the more we understand about it, the more complex and amazing it is. So that, to me, that becomes very strong position for arguing against like the Darwinism or the idea that it came about through chance and through sort of evolution of that nature. And to me, the idea of like intelligent design is almost like a best probable explanation to what we are seeing around us. But you wouldn't say that. Would you say like evolution, and would you say?
I think intelligence is us internalizing the way things work. Do you see what I mean? And then we think, hey, look, it's all intelligible. But if our mind had evolved to process what's going on, it would mirror quite well reality, or we'd have become extinct. So, but then you get you look out and you say, hey, but it all makes sense intellectually. Well, yeah, and so I suppose, if as a metaphor, if I was a dog, isn't it incredible that the whole world is full of scent? Obviously, a dog made the world, but
right. Okay.
Do you see what I mean?
Okay, so I see
but
that.
It's presuming that it's reversing the thing, and I suppose even a Christian would have to believe the reason that our mind works is it mirrors something in God. Do you see what I mean? Rather than God must be intelligent and he must be like me. He's not like you, you're like him. Do you know what I mean? It's a kind of reversal, but I'm not doing it with a personal, but I'm doing it with whatever you call it, reality, or whatever. I wouldn't be here, our species wouldn't have survived if this processing device didn't say, hey, look, isn't it amazing? It all makes sense to me.
Got it. Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think because we as Christians, we would say that being made in the image of God probably includes things like such as having a will, rationality, agency, independent free will, that kind of stuff would be part of it. But to me, I mean, that's not necessarily it for me. For me, it's looking at things like a single cell, right, and looking at the DNA. being because my background is computer science, and I see code, DNA code, and information that is instruction to build something.
Yeah.
And every example possible that we have of anything which gives instructions there's an intelligent mind behind
it. Is it an instruction? I know we call the DNA code a code.
Yeah.
Is it a code or an instruction, or can we just read it as an instruction?
Well, it behaves like an instruction.
I mean,
to the
if someone
extent
wrote
that
it to be read,
yes,
it's a code.
Yes.
Do you see what I mean?
So I don't know. Then maybe I'm not
It's
appreciating
kind of like
the nuance,
when you talk about the laws of nature.
Yeah.
There's an implication. There's a lawmaker and an obedient universe.
Yeah.
And to take the code implies it is written to communicate instructions, maybe not to humans, but to the world. But that's an implication that it was written to do that, rather than it came about.
Yes, but I guess behaviorally
it's a metaphor, code.
Yeah, I mean, we use the word code because that's the language and that's something that makes sense to us. But I mean, behaviorally, it has the attributes of being an encoding, meaning a smaller package of information that, when interpreted, produces some specific and repeatable result.
Yes.
That's a definition of
it is
an
amazing thing. I agree with you. It's amazing that water has a mind, because water always finds its own level. But you see what I'm doing intellectually here.
Well, it's slightly different, right? Because I think the complexity. So water is just subject to physical properties. Like you drop it below a certain level, will freeze. It'll turn. Anyway, we kind of departed from but I guess my point is that, to me, intelligence behind the creation is convincing. Let's put it that way. But that just gets us, at the very best, to the idea of God. But like me as a Christian, it wouldn't be the only reason I would believe. I mean, that's maybe a starting position for the existence of God. But Christians are obviously much more personally involved with God. And so my next question was going to be, going back to the idea of like the Bible and Jesus being the person who lived 2,000 years ago. Would you not say that those are reliable records?
Are the Gospels reliable records? I mean, this would just go into tiny little, ever-decreasing technical points, but I'm not sure they actually even agree with each other in the text. I see biblical contradictions, but every one of which could be explained. But it's a question of whether you're satisfied with the explanation. So would I say they're reliable? No, I wouldn't. No, I mean, looking at what's said, if that was, say, a witness account I'm looking through the notes of a court case from the last century, I would say these are unreliable witnesses.
Okay. So you would reading those accounts, you would say these are unreliable witnesses.
Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting, because that's quite the opposite from the scholarly position. Even the non-believing scholarly positions, they would say Bible is a fairly reliable evidence of a person, Jesus, having existed.
I'm not saying he didn't exist.
Okay, so which part? So if we can say, okay, those are good enough to describe a person, Jesus, who existed 2,000 years ago, which parts would you find unreliable?
Well, it's not just that the Gospels say that he existed. First of all, without knowing much about the history of Karl Marx, I would presume that Karl Marx existed, or we've got an even more remarkable thing to explain, that what was it, 50, 60 years later, some states are becoming Marxist. And Engels or someone else would have had to invent it. It just becomes more and more crazy.
Absolutely, so exactly. I agree with you. I agree. We can even look beyond the Bible to draw those conclusions.
Yes.
But doesn't that build more of a Christian case then? Because we do see that early, first, second century evidence of beliefs that are pretty established at that point of the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. Pretty well established from the gospel writers, but also from the Roman historians, the Jewish historians. We have archaeological evidence. We have early churches. We have the church fathers who have written their beliefs. We have quite strong a set of evidence of.
Well, you could just look at the sort of growth rate of a new major religion enhanced to go from zero to the 3rd century, it would have to have begun around about then. In fact, if you were estimating, you'd have put it earlier because it grew very fast.
Yes.
So
Yes.
so it would have to exist. And now you're saying, and the early people made up a fictitious character that they were willing to die for. Why? Why wouldn't they say, I'm God's representative? Because most people starting a sect, they, it's me, I'm listed to be wired. So it's none of this is impossible, but you would just sort of presume that if a cult, I mean, there were other Jewish leaders as well, I've forgotten the names at the time, we presume they exist because it would be more crazy if after they've supposedly died and failed, people made them up. Why would you make up someone after they've died and say he was, it gets more, I would just presume that there was a Jesus, like I presume that Karl Marx isn't made up. And
Well, this is okay, good. And so I guess my then question is, so which parts would you not give way to if Jesus did exist?
I'm not. That he was a religious leader, that he was Jewish, the really obvious things. I'm not even sure that what he taught was, as they would say he taught. Perhaps they started to gradually deify him, or whatever they did, because some people would say even that the Gospels don't deify Jesus, you'd be a Unitarian or whatever. But
there are those beliefs,
but we don't know. I mean, because there's different strands running through it. Some of it seems to be more using religion to make a message about earth, how you live, a moral teacher. So we don't know, because I'm seeing enthusiastic writers of the Gospels who have their message. This is what Jesus was about.
Right. When you say okay, yes.
So even what he said, even what he taught, I'm not really sure of. But you can. The only evidence we have of him is that he did teach morally. He did have references to God. He was Jewish and these sort of things. So on that very scant level, you could say that I assume all that's true.
But wouldn't you then have to pick and choose, right? And I wonder what basis you would use to pick and choose.
No,
right?
you don't really have to. You can just say that there was somebody. I accept that there probably was somebody there. In the same way, I accept there probably was someone called Socrates. We don't have from him anything whatsoever, but we have some other writers talking about what he said, and they have a stance to take. I would say that Socrates probably was in Athens, because it would be very strange if he was in Spartus or so, wouldn't it? That would be weird. And he probably was someone, and he probably was going around using questioning techniques. Do you know what I mean? Very scant things that it would be absurd not to accept.
Yeah, exactly. So
did he teach what Plato said? Well, that's where it gets a bit iffy, because Plato's in the next generation and trying to borrow. Do you know what I mean? He might. Yeah.
So we can use the same critical textual analysis on the Bible as well, right? We can say, okay, the things that they have said directly, the things that they have not said, and the details that they've included, that they've not included. But to me, the overall picture that emerges is one of a sincere record of history from multiple eyewitnesses, right? So if this was just a single book that was written by one person, I think there will be a very huge amount of question marks about, because there will be an accusation of conspiracy potentially to make this story come out. But we're talking about multiple writings from different styles, different backgrounds, different times, people who have not necessarily known one another, who are recording things, to your point, that are in some cases slightly different versions of same events. But they include enough details that we know that they lived in that time. You wouldn't be able to write in the same way unless you lived at the time. You wouldn't know the names.
I don't believe they were made up in the 5th century. No, I mean they are. Even if let's say John's Gospel was written in 120, it's still similar from an authentic point of view.
Exactly, and then the question presents to ourselves as well. Either we are dealing with authentic eyewitnesses of events,
Well,
or we're dealing with a grand conspiracy of people, and then I think that latter one is probably more difficult to explain. What would drive people to create this conspiracy? Who was the leader of this conspiracy? What was their objection and gain? Because they all pretty much went to their deaths, and they weren't like living a cultish life of grandeur and power and fame and wealth. That wasn't their conclusion. Their conclusion was death in Roman different sort of arenas and other stuff. They were persecuted, they were marginalized, ridiculed, and put to death. I mean,
but
so
other religions have also had that, and they've absolutely been certain they're right.
Oh yes, I'm not saying a fundamentalist Islamic believer who blows himself up is sincere, but is he true? I'm not saying that's truth and equal sincerity, but I'm saying we have sincerity as a argument against conspiracy at a grand scale. Usually conspiracies at a grand scale don't work with sincere people. You have to pay quite a lot of people quite a lot of money to come up with stories that align to one another independently, right? Usually people would fall out, and then the conspiracy breaks down. That's just generally how things work. So I'm saying those two combinations, to me, speak of people who lived at the time, who were sincere, who saw and wrote down what they did. Why is that not convincing, though?
I'm not even sure that the Gospels are a primary source. I mean, if you say that John's Gospel, and the reason I mention that is it cites John as a source. How can it be John's Gospel and cite him as a source?
When you say it doesn't cite him as a source, he speaks
says,
of himself.
These are the words of John, and we know he is reliable.
Oh, he doesn't speak it this way. This is the disciple who wrote.
I'll have to check later on, but
This is, I would say Jesus loved disciple, and this is the disciple who wrote these things, and he wrote them so that you may know and believe that Jesus is the one. I mean, he reflects on himself as being the writer of the gospel. He doesn't speak of himself in the third person. No, he doesn't.
I'll have to check that, but because there's different translations.
Sure.
I think it does say he's reliable, but I'll concede that I haven't got it with me, but yeah, and the whole business that they obviously are quoting each other.
In some cases, that's what I'm saying. There are some stories. So yes, I agree that there's a knowledge of certain events that all four of them must have been aware of, like the feeding of the 5,000 must have been an event that somehow all five or four of them were aware of.
But they are comparing notes, which isn't a sin.
Yeah.
Because if I was one of the apostles, one of the first things I'd do after Jesus had died, I realised, it's not over, he's resurrected. We'd have to say, we've got to get together. We've got to...
But Luke is very explicit about this. He even says at the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, he says, because Luke wasn't himself an apostle, certainly not one of the early apostles. He later joined the movement. But it says in the opening paragraph of Gospel of Luke, he has taken time to create an orderly account of all the things that have happened in order to convey that account to someone, a Theophilus, whether that's the right, whether that's a real person or not, I do not know, but he put the account together through interviews. So he interviewed eyewitnesses, so some of them told him what they saw, and maybe in some cases he has consulted already previous writings that people have pointed him to.
And he does. I think it's Luke who actually says, look, this is a human initiative. I decided that it was time, it needed doing, and so on.
Absolutely. So no one is denying that there weren't accounts circulating, that maybe there was a Q source that potentially has preceded some of these. But at the same time, we have uniqueness between the gospel as well. We have accounts in John, for example, the woman who was stoned or about to be stoned for her sins that Jesus has stopped. I think it's a unique account for John. We have unique accounts in other gospels, so they must have, in addition to leveraging what existed, they must have already also on top of that had unique sources or having been sourced themselves.
Well, I mean, what Jesus said to Pontius Pilate is so unique.
Yes.
You'd have to say, how do you know this? Were you there? No. Do you know someone who's there? No, but he probably said. So there is things that are just.
Well, what we do know, I mean, we can construct a history.
Yeah.
There's a very plausible explanation, because we know that from the Pontius Pilate's household, people became Christians.
Yeah.
And within earshot of Pontius Pilate, whether those servants, sorry,
during the interrogation.
Maybe even during the soldiers, so the centurion became a Christian,
Wouldn't
right?
you say this? Wouldn't you cite a source then, say, as we know from the head of the household?
Well, I'm not. But if we did have a source cited, I would have probably volunteered it to you in the beginning. I'm just saying there's a plausible way. Your question was, how did we know what Jesus' words were to Pontius Pilate?
Yeah.
We don't know. The short answer is we do not know who overheard those to write them down. But I'm saying there's a plausible explanation. The plausibility coming from later, we know the members of the Pontius Pilate's household became Christians, and we know soldiers like the centurion became a Christian. The very centurion whom Pontius Pilate employed to put Jesus on the cross, to finish him off on the cross, was the one who became a Christian. And maybe he was within the earshot. I do not know. We do not know for certain. I'm just saying it's plausible, right? And I guess my overall point with all of this stuff is to say we have again, going back to the point, we have writers who were either themselves in the earshot and could record, or leveraged directly from people who were there, like Luke, who leveraged and interviewed eyewitnesses. And all of them wrote down. There are multiple sources, multiple eyewitnesses. They all agree in the main points. I'm not saying they agree in every single detail, but that's what you would expect when you're dealing with eyewitness testimony. There are variations, and there are things that even if you and I observed a thing that is happening there in that forest, you would describe it slightly differently than I would.
You keep on saying the eyewitness account, but even what's within that admits that, as you said, that some of it's second-hand. It's not.
Some of it is second-hand, but this is. Some of it must have been coming from first-hand, because they wouldn't have recorded, like you said, the dialogues. Where did those come from? The details, the names. Enough. The basis for evidence is so overpowering, I would say, that there's really only one conclusion with the amount of evidence. I mean, out of any historical work that we have, you mentioned Socrates, I would mention many others, right? Historically, I mean, the scripture has the number of copies and the original manuscripts, not the original manuscripts, I mean the early copies of the manuscripts. It is the highest by far out of any historical work, right? So if you're going to be comparing, let's say, the reliability of the Bible to reliability of any ancient work, and coming to the conclusion of the veracity of that work, the Bible by far is at the very, very top.
Now, I'm not talking about whether it's what the document said originally. It's the authenticity of the original document that I'm saying that about.
Okay, clarify that for me. Sorry.
You're talking about the number of copies we have and how we can work out what the original text and all that. And I agree, it's overwhelming.
That plus the distance to the original event. Like, so for example, we have, like you said, 2nd, 3rd century. The distance to the 1st century, when it's described, the events are described, is only, let's say, a couple of decades. Right? Whereas for other writings, I don't know, Caesar, whatever, or Hannibal's wars and other things that we know are from the first copies that we have come hundreds or sometimes even 1,000 years after the events that they portray have happened, right? So the distance between the event and the early copies is much greater. So it's the reliability in terms of distance in history, as well as the number of copies that and what the content of the text actually is.
But I mean
on every way, I guess on every way that historians could potentially conceive of measuring reliability and veracity, Bible comes at the very top on every level, every measurement.
If I saw a documentary saying that an American televangelist has genuinely raised 3 people from the dead this week, and it's this week, why would I still be sceptical? Do you see what I mean? Well, it's not to do with that it couldn't be true. And by the way, I wouldn't automatically dismiss it. But I'd be
It's the same thing with me. What I would want to know then is I would want to know some independent confirmations of that. Right?
Yes,
That's how journalism works.
The first thing I'd do is I'd go on to journalists, because I'd say, this story, someone's going to be out to disprove it. Can they do it?
Exactly.
And this sort of thing, right?
Exactly, that's what you would do.
It would take a lot of convincing. Now, I'm not questioning that Jesus existed, that there was a guy called Paul, or that there were 12 disciples, or this sort of thing. I guess what I'm saying is, can we reliably discern whether Jesus was teaching anything like Paul taught, or that Jesus was teaching anything like the Gospels say, and this kind of stuff is that how it's the detail. It's not so much do they come from the right era. I can easily accept that they come from about the right era. There's many different ways you can look at that. It's that's not the issue anyway.
Okay.
The question is, are they accurate, which is slightly different. Now, if you were cross-examining people in the court of law, it could be something that happened last week. And you're not even saying they're not a witness. Mm-hmm. But someone says, I saw him fire the gun. So which hand did he use? The right hand.
Yeah.
So, but you said earlier on that he turned his back to you.
Yeah.
And did you see what I mean? And they're not deliberately lying, but when you go through the details, say, is this actually reliable? And it's not a question, is this person intentionally lying? If you see someone to the back pull out and go bang, and you hear a gun, you've seen them fire a gun, but you didn't actually see the gun. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah. But you mentally, and it's so there's I'm not sure I'm convinced reading the Gospels that this really happened. I mean, that you'll be aware of the technical little differences, like who got out the boat, and were they actually on the mount, or did they come down from the mount for the sermon? You'll be aware of all these little tiny finicky differences. Yeah. And so, did Judas kill himself, or was he struck dead? All these sort of things, but they do add up to a credibility issue. But I admit, if they all agreed entirely on that, I'd probably say they compared notes. So
no, exactly, right. So this was going to be my retort, right? It's just like, that's when then you get to the conspiracy accusation. Yes. But okay, so we discussed two things so far. I was going to get to the third one, and then I was going to give you some time back. But the first thing we talked about the existence of God. Second thing we talked about the reliability of the Bible. But the third thing is really that thing that you just started to kind of edge into, and that is, what does the Bible actually say? And so if I were to ask you, like, what is the message of Christianity? Like, what was the core thing that the Bible is trying to, or the Christian message is trying to convey out to the world? What would you say it is?
So we're talking not so much whatever Jesus said, but what were the people from sort of 70 or 60 to 200 or whenever it was written or rewritten?
Yeah. What would be their message?
I think they were saying. Yes, I think they were saying there was a God. I think they were saying that the only way to be put right with God, it was the Jewish concept of God. The only way to be put right with him would be that Jesus was sacrificed. And that you have to put your faith in there, not just believe about it. Because if there's one criticism of Christians is belief has gradually evolved into theology. Whereas it's a bit more than theology. You wouldn't say, I believe in if you're married, I believe in my wife, means I think she exists. It's a bit more than that.
Right, exactly.
But I think they were saying it was a Jewish influenced group who was expanding to the wider post-Hellenistic world, the Roman Empire, whatever. And they were saying that there is the God of Abraham is right, and the only way to be reconciled to him is through this death of Jesus. Was not a disaster. No, it was always meant to happen. It was a sacrifice. But as you can tell, I'm sceptical about that bit. I'm suspecting that they didn't expect him to die, and they thought, he's been abandoned by God. He's been forsaken. It's gone wrong.
Yes. Yeah.
And then they had to reinterpret. Rather like people at the end of you think end of the world sects couldn't possibly survive when the date comes if they've been stupid enough to predict the date. They almost all do.
Yes. Yeah.
And then they set another date, as if they haven't learnt from the first lesson. And the reason is, I think some of them are sincere. Because if they were conning you, they wouldn't choose another date 10 years later. So, but they do, and I think that's what happened with Christianity, that he's dead. And they've even recorded that he seems to say, "Why have you forsaken me?" As if he didn't expect it.
Right.
Now, what happened afterwards? Well, that's the big question. Was there a mass delusion? Was there some people inventing the witnesses? I don't know. That's where we've only got 4 sources on it. Well, 5 if you include a second-hand Paul.
Right.
But yeah.
Right. Okay, it's interesting. So I think some of those things, as a Christian, again, I would agree, and I would resonate with, like the fact of the Jesus' sacrifice for our sins. But I think what I would add to that is that, and I would agree also that it was unexpected to the extent that that element was surprising even to the disciples. Like Judas, for example, he wanted to see a political uprising. So did Peter to some extent. He completely missed the point until the very late stages where he understood that this was a spiritual revolution, not a physical one. But I think, upon reflection, and this is coming up especially through the letters of the apostles that come after the Gospels. Then they start to mature, and that they start to, because Jesus did say to them, apparently as recorded in the I think Gospel of Luke, he explained to them how he was actually on the pages of the Old Testament, that he was the one that was foreseen. He was the Christ. He was the God's anointed king. He was the one that was to come. He was the prophesied one of Isaiah 53 and many other prophets, right? Yeah. And so they realized then that actually there was the God's suffering servant, and that he was the Messiah that was to come, and that he actually is that person, right? So I think theologically that makes sense, and then the resurrection for me was also a very, very big point of evidence through which Paul says that if there's no resurrection, there's no Christianity, right? Yeah. So I think that theologically it's not just about sacrifice, but it's about as you say, believing in him to the extent that our sins are cast upon him. And so the reason this is why he says that, God, God, why have you forsaken me, is that at that moment on the cross, because he bears our sins, God is rejecting him and pouring out his wrath, as he would on any sin, and as he did in the Old Testament multiple times on any sin. So they're separated. Yeah. The Son is separated from the Father because of the sin that the Son bears now. God's wrath is being poured down on the sin.
He didn't say, by the way, Father, why have you forsaken me? He said, God, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani.
I know that's a bit of a snipe, but you'll know this is what I'm getting at here.
Yeah. So what are you getting at? Yeah. What is it?
The Trinity would have a problem. The Trinitarian should have a problem with God's forsaken Jesus. I'm not saying there isn't an explanation about the human nature and the God nature. No, exactly. The human nature is, but it's another thing that I'm not quite sure that...
The thing is that he was quoting the Old Testament Psalm. That's why he uses those
so he didn't mean... I'm being nasty, sorry.
No, he is, but he's trying. I mean, this is the nature of the prophetic writing, and this is the nature of when Jesus used those words from David's Psalms. Yeah. Specifically, it is believed because he wanted to make a point not just about the fact that he did feel abandoned. That was true. But actually, he was the one of whom it was prophesied that he would be abandoned by God, and so he used those words rather than change them. But anyway, these are theological points that we can debate and we can go into. But I guess my point is that is the gospel, right? That is the gospel. That is the good news. The good news is not achieving power and wealth and fame, but it's to, as you, I think, very well put it, put your trust in someone. For the reasons of cleansing of the sins and gaining eternal life through God himself, God's own Son, who came down, became one of us, and did that. And that is a very unique message, very uniquely religious. Like, there are no religions that I know of, certainly not major ones, who have a God sacrificing himself for the benefit of his creation. It's very unusual, I would say. and very compelling. To me, that's another feather in the hat of veracity and compelling message of a religion that is not promoting human types of things that we would naturally like gravitate, but it promotes humility and denial of oneself and trusting of God, who is loving us so much that he would die for us.
Yeah.
That is an exemplary message of love. That's why we can say God is love. That's why we can say that Christianity is a religion of love, is through that very example.
Well, the message, but so what went wrong with, you know all the Christian history that I'm referring to, because that isn't as a generalization of historic Christianity, is it?
Is it not? I know which examples you're discussing, or when maybe you have in mind, but I would say that is also to be expected, because we are naturally still sinful, and we distort, and we turn those ideas into ideas of power and institution, and that thing corrupts.
Yeah.
But the beauty of it is that there's a self-correcting mechanism, because we can point to every single case, to the crusader, to the priest that abuses the child, to the multiple thousands and millions of other examples where things have failed, point to the scripture and say, you, my friend or enemy, are departed from the very doctrines that you purport to ascribe to, and that is a self-correcting mechanism. Where that mirror can be put before them and say, you are wrong. And I think that is what happened throughout history. That is why we are able to condemn those things. Yeah. Whereas I think other religions, probably like Islam, to me, is an example of a religion that doesn't have that mirror whatsoever. In fact, has quite the opposite. It overtly encourages violence and oppression of the Jew, of the Christian. And there's no self-correcting mechanism whatsoever. It's just the fact that they don't read their own scriptures as much as they should to come to that conclusion. Whereas, because it's in Arabic, and you must read it in Arabic to know its true meaning. Whereas in Christianity, scriptures were very, very much encouraged to be translated into as many languages as possible.
But you still accept the bit about dashing Babylonian babies against rocks to kill them, and it was a good thing, you'll be blessed. And you know all the Old Testament references about genocide, about...
To me, kind of dispensational in that regard, in the sense that those were instructions given to the Jews at that time as a way of God's judgment over those nations. And I think it'll be worse than that to come. Like Noah's, like people talk about babies, like Noah's flood to me was a much greater atrocity under that sort of rubric, right? Because the entire world, not of just a couple of babies or whatever it is, the entire world was destroyed.
Or the next big flood, which is predicted in
the Bible.
Or
the next one in the Revelation, the one that will see the basically all of the elements and the scorching of the earth. I mean, to me, those are all God's. I'm not, this is truly and obviously God's act. And so he's not like an innocent sort of someone who does, he's a very wrathful God, and that is something that's overt in Christianity. But it's in the context of that there's a love element here, so that he's not judging those who are he's judging righteously, right? So he's judging those who have set themselves up against the righteousness by doing wickedness and wicked works that are self-obviously wicked, meaning not just that they're not believing. That's not their sin. The sin is certainly for the Babylonians was the sin of actually sacrificing babies to the god Molech, and doing other atrocious things, prostitution and other things that were by any standard not the right things to be done. Right?
Yeah, I know, but so you. Instead of they're wrong for sacrificing their babies, now you go in and kill their babies with them.
I would say the standards are different here, because it's not me. I wouldn't do that, right? And neither the Jews on their own volition do that. They're instructed by God, right? So if you think about God, who's the king, who's the creator, who has the right, just like a judge in this world, right? The judge has the power to sentence someone to death. Yeah. That judge is empowered by the society to convict someone to death, whereas you and me, we couldn't convict someone to death because we wouldn't have that
God
power.
isn't empowered by humans to do that. He
God
just says,
isn't, but
hey,
he
I'm
is,
God,
exactly, because he
yeah.
doesn't have, exactly, he
Yeah.
doesn't have anyone to answer to, but
Yeah.
he's God, and he has every right to do that.
So he lovingly destroys the babies and the
He
children.
can, but if you think about where does that baby go when they die? Where do you think they go?
Well, the only way to God is Jesus. They didn't know the name Jesus back then, but it would be trusting in God.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it hadn't reached the point that it could trust in God or the Jewish salvation, so it would be presumably, hell? I don't know if the Jews at that point believed in hell or not.
Not at that point, they probably
No.
didn't, but they believe in Sheol, right?
Yeah.
And they did believe in a certain sense of afterlife. Anyway, my point was not so much to have a theological debate where the babies sort of have it. But I'm just saying that God has an eternity in mind when he convicts people. So that means it's not just about the quality of life on this earth.
Yeah.
God always has the eternity in mind. And so in this, I believe personally, babies do end up in heaven.
Yeah.
And so even if the babies are destroyed by God, and they are every day today being destroyed through abortion and other things, I believe that they end up with God in heaven, right? And so that's not our act. If we should for us to do that now would be sin if we were to do that on our own act and volition. But in God, who actually has the power of life and death in his hands and has the power of eternity, I don't think he can be accused of any. We are not here to judge him, because his standard is absolute and ours isn't on that basis. Yeah. So anyway, but I know that's taking us quite a sort of theological, doctrinal maybe territories. Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, none of this is why I don't really believe anymore. It's partly that it's partly just it didn't add up to overall convincing. Though I'm perfectly aware that, and you'll be perfectly aware, for anything you say there is a counter argument. You can't absolutely prove it in this, and it was also the inner resonance, which is hard to explain. Do you know what I mean? When you don't think about it once, you keep thinking about something when you're questioning something, like I was then.
Yes.
It keeps resonating as,
Which I agree with you. I think it is a matter. That's where, for me, it becomes that resonance. To me, is a matter where faith pulls towards the final step, and to me, that is a part that is supernatural.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned it earlier, and I liked the way you said. I forgot exactly the way you said. But we can't believe intellectually and then expect that we would truly believe. It requires that trust, and trust comes through a relationship.
Yeah.
And that example with the wife, I thought was really pointed, because I use it sometimes myself. To me, that's how I describe relationship with me and my God. It is a relationship. It's not just an intellectual acknowledgement, but it is a kind of a give and a take, a discussion, a dialogue, a continuous self-denial, humility, but prayer, blessing. It's a relationship. That's what it comes. Disappointments, joys, everything that comes with it. That's the reward of it, and ultimately, hopefully, leading to an ultimate reward. Yeah, but it doesn't. It's not like something you can talk yourself into necessarily. It's something that comes about through an inner desire, which I think itself, because I'm more of a sort of a Calvinist by conviction, but even that desire ultimately is something that I believe God sparks within us. And he does that to people who are open to receiving him. And so maybe it starts with a place of openness, and then I think continues maybe through a place of seeking and establishing that relationship, and then nurturing and fostering that relationship, and I think it blooms into full faith.
Yeah.
But I appreciate not everyone.
Well, anyway, your devotion and my pride have stopped us from shivering visibly, but...
Indeed. But I really appreciated your. It sounds like you definitely have thought this and given it much thought, and I certainly appreciate your openness and your willingness to give me the time that I took from you. So apologies for taking too much maybe of it.
Well, I hope I haven't sounded what I will try to be, because I have listened on YouTube and things to like,
Sure.
atheists and Christians, and I want to make my mind up to be, if I have a discussion like this, not the guy who's trying to win the argument. Do you know what I mean? It's hard to.
And you were, because I did. This is obviously not
Because-
my first and not your first conversation, but I would say that you have excelled in that.
Yeah.
That you were never trying to do that. I would say
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the conversation because you just said what is it that you truly held in your heart, and you weren't trying to mock or to otherwise. Be obnoxious in any way. So I really enjoyed it. So I appreciate your time.
Okay.
And my only desire is that first of all, I hope I wasn't obnoxious to you either.
No.
My desire is that we continue to ponder these things on
yeah.
both sides. I think
yeah.
to me, truth is a wonderful thing, and I think we always should be, wherever the truth leads us, we should go there.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if truth's always wonderful, but it is true. It's got that going for it.
it does. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.